Yeah, thank you. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this evening's Cabinet of Broadland District Council on the 6th of July, 2021. Just like to remind everyone that this meeting is being streamed on the Council's YouTube channel. Okay, so moving into the agenda. First item on the agenda is to receive declarations of interest. And I'm actually going to do one myself relating to item 15, as I'm promoting a site for residential development in Coney, which has not been taken forward under the Greater Norwich Local Plan through the Greater Norwich Local Plan. Okay, sorry, I just repeated myself. Should this site come under further consideration, I shall declare a disclosable pecuniary interest and shall vacate the chair and leave the room. In this case, under the provision of the Code of Conduct, I do not have any interest to declare, which would prevent me from participating in the debate and chairing the meeting today. So that's where we are with that one. Has anyone else got any declarations of interest that they wish to declare? No? Okay. Just to say, I'm also going to move the agenda around a little bit. So item 15 will now come after item 8. So we'll slot it in after the place shaping development panel. Okay, so that moves on to minutes of the meeting held on the 15th of June. Can I take those as being correct, or are there any changes, updates, additions, deletions that are required in the minutes? No? Okay, so I'll take those as being correct. I will sign those off. Matters arising in those minutes, Judy?
Engaging YMCA to provide mental health support for young people. I wondered if this work had started, and if you could just remind me how young people will access this support. Oh, sorry.
If you could, just please, Jamie.
Sorry, my working. There, that's better. Yes, so the contract was signed with YMCA on the 1st of July. So we are either operational or will be within the next few days or weeks. In terms of access, the routes for access for our own residents or caseload will be through our help hub. And I assume the YMCA will have their own access routes as well, but forgive me for not having that level of detail. I'll maybe come back to the portfolio holder with a better answer, but certainly we'll be making referrals into the YMCA, and indeed the YMCA will be working as a part of our help hub setup.
Thank you. That's good to know. That's progressing well. So thank you for that. Again, just wanted to pick up on a couple of pieces in there. I noted that minute 228 member IT has now been added to the forward plan. So thank you for doing that. The other one I just wanted to pick up on was minute 7 relating to the COVID-19 recovery plan, which we talked about at the June meeting. And as part of that, we said about bringing back the Appendix A with the updated finances once we were in a position to better understand those. If possible, could I ask for them to come back in September? It would help us to then be more informed around our choices looking at next year's budgets. So if we could do that, that would be useful. Was there anything for anybody else? No? Okay, so that moves us on then to the public speaking. And this evening we have Mr. Trevor Bennett with us from Aylsham Town Council, the chairman. So
yeah, now, unfortunately, yeah.
I ask him to come forward. So you've got 3 minutes as such to speak, Mr. Bennett. So over to you.
Thank you, Sean. I don't know whether this is now working, but if not, I'll be a teacher. As you can see, Aylsham Town Council, from what we tabled with you, many residents and the Town Council itself feel that the GNLP has still not taken into consideration consultation with the Town Council and the town. We were quite happy with one site and Regulation 18, though unhappy with the fact that all the comments we made about the choice of the particular site, we've never had discussions about them. Then when Regulation 19 came in, they nearly doubled the number of the homes to be built. Again, there's been talk from the officers that they've consulted us, but they haven't. I think at best you could say that comment at the ONS meeting was economical with the truth. In Norfolk, you used to have the Norfolk 3-tier system, which meant there was considerable consultation through the 3 tiers of local government. This no longer seems to happen. What the town council would really appreciate, would like, is actually a meeting with the planning officers to actually discuss the problems of you deciding to have 2 sites when only one was expected. There are a lot of issues which won't be easily solved with just more money. I do feel that increase was a reaction to the government white paper, but I don't think that's likely now to come through to fruition in the present form. That's going to be quite remote, I think. So I don't feel there's any rush to push a plan which I feel, and many others do, is flawed. So I would urge the councillors to actually put a hold on the plan for full and proper consultation. And hopefully that's no more than 3 minutes this time, Sean.
Thank you for that, Mr. Bennett. So, thank you for your question, and I'd ask the planning portfolio holder just to answer your question and pick up your points.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Bennett, for attending the meeting this evening and asking your questions. And I just need to apologise that I'm sitting with my back to you, but the microphone and everything else, we have to do it this way. Apologies. If I may address your point on the lack of consultation moving from 1 site to 2 sites in Aylsham, there was considerable consultation for both sites under Regulation 18. If I could refer you to page 114 of our Cabinet papers this evening, Table 2 and Section 3. The 2012 planning regulations anticipated that there would be changes in whatever had been consulted on after the regulation consultation. At the Regulation 18C draft plan staged at the Greater Norwich Local Plan, overall housing numbers were consulted on. Alternative sites were consulted on, as well as those sites proposed for allocation. It is common for new sites to be proposed for allocation at the Reg 19 stage if the local planning authority needs to supplement its allocation to better meet the needs. As I've already stated, the report highlights that the representations have been made on the plan-making process and on the consequent increase in housing numbers for Aylsham. The overall housing numbers have been raised in response to new evidence from the 2018 household projections and the government's clear national policy priority of addressing the in-housing crisis. This rise in overall housing numbers has included an additional site in Aylsham for 250 homes, which was consulted on as a potential alternative through the Reg 18 consultation in early 2020. The Norwich Road site would provide 250 homes in a sustainable location, including housing for the elderly and the potential for a car park as included in Aylsham's neighbourhood plan. In addition to the site in Aylsham, to assist in providing for additional overall housing overall, numbers have been doubled in East Norwich to 4,000 homes, and change to sites have been included in Acle, Conley, Cringleford, Harleston and Windham. Overall housing numbers in the plan in Elsham are similar to those in Diss and Harleston and significantly lower than those on the other main towns as Long Stratton and Windham. Concerns were raised over the capacity of Elsham's infrastructure to cope with the additional homes, including schools, sewage, highways, and integrating new communities. In relation to these concerns, the infrastructure providers have been involved throughout the plan, making process, and are fully aware of the needs to provide additional capacity as and when the growth takes place. This includes a new primary school on the Berg Road housing estate. It is understood that the Berg Road site was a preferred option, but it was also felt that the Norwich Road site was a reasonable option, hence the reason for its inclusion under Reg 19 process. With the release of the government white paper Planning for the Future, it was realised our housing numbers would need to be increased, and at the second site in Elsham has been consulted upon, it was appropriate, therefore, Norwich Road site should be included. In relation to the evidence that there have been serious considerations for residents' comments, I would remind you that there are numerous details to the views of residents from Elsham in this report. For example, on page 124, the process section, top of page 129, growth in main towns, page 131, consultation section, bottom of page 134, location of growth section, page 141, Elsham topic of main towns, and pages 153 and 154 in the sites section under main towns, Elsham. Page 123 gives a breakdown on the number of representatives for Elsham sites. There will always be an opportunity for residents to address the inspector, either by written format or in person if they so wish. The Greater Norwich Local Plan applies to 400,000 residents in the Greater Norwich area. 69 representatives from Elsham, along with many other responses, they have been listened to and detailed for submission to the inspector. I can confirm we did consult on the Norwich Road site during Reg 8, which makes it appropriate at this additional site on Norwich Road to the plan, to add this additional site to the Norwich Road plan. 3 Regulation 18 consultations have taken place on the plan, including consultation events in Elsham and meetings with Elsham Town Council. We are now at the soundness stage of plan making, which will include an examination in public of the Greater Norwich Local Plan when the Greater Norwich Local Plan is submitted. For such an examination, the independent inspector will have access to full representations which are made on the Greater Norwich Local Plan website. The inspector will also have the representation summaries and responses in the statements of consultation. Discussions on specific sites and locations for growth, such as Elsham, will no doubt be a key part of the examination. The inspector will then determine whether specific sites should be included in the plan or not. Therefore, we as Broadland District Council are confident this Greater Norwich Development Plan is sound and compliant and should be submitted to the inspector for his consideration. Your question asked, and I'm just relaying to the question that was sent through to me. Your question asked for a meeting with the officers in the Town District Council to discuss the housing plans of Elsham, which I'm very happy to arrange at a time convenient to the officers and councillors, COVID permitting, as soon as possible. Once again, my apologies for turning my back on you. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you for that, Sue. Mr. Bennett, you have your response. Is there anything further you'd like to say at this point?
Well, all I would like to say is thank you to Sue for, first of all, greeting me downstairs and then for explaining your point of view. But could we contact you Sue could contact you to have a discussion about this? Because some of it is actually more to do with moving certain things, some of it. Particularly we're concerned about the location of the schools, say, and that type of thing. So,
More than happy, Chair, to arrange a meeting with the officers, myself, and your councillors.
yeah, we're just 2 or 3, not 16. That wouldn't work.
However many you like.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you
I'll
very
get
much.
Sue to contact you.
Lovely. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Shall I
Okay,
nip
so
off then?
thank you for that, Mr. Bennett. You can do if you want, although we have brought your item forward so that you may want to stay for that or not, as the
Is
case
it
may
in a
be.
minute or two?
Sorry?
Is it shortly or?
Yes.
Oh, I'll wait for that.
Okay, so thank you for that. Okay, so that moves us on then to representation from non-cabinet members. And other than Martin, who's here representing ONS, I don't see any others around. So if they do appear, we'll invite them to join us and partake if so. That moves on to overview and scrutiny. And we have the Vice Chair for overview and scrutiny here. So good evening, Martin. Is there anything you want to say at this point in time, or would you rather
No.
bring you in as and when you need?
As and when, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay, so that moves us on then to item number 8, which is the Place Shaping Policy Development Panel. So Sue, over to you. Yeah, okay, sorry. So what you've got on the Place Shaping panel is on page 246, and it is just to receive the minutes. So if you could just ask Cabinet to receive the minutes, then that's all that's needed.
If Cabinet could please receive the minutes from the place shaping plan. Thank you.
Thank you, we will do so. Okay, so that moves us on then to item 15, which we've brought forward, which is the Greater Norwich Local Plan, starting at page 100. And this is in relation to the submission to the Secretary of State for independent examination.
That I do have.
Jolly good. I think, Helen, you introducing this one, so do you want to go first?
Yes, more than happy to. And I've just got apologies from Mike Burrell.
I think it's because Trevor's mic is still on. If you just turn Trevor's off, that's it, then yours will go on.
Sorry, thank you. You can hear me now.
Okay.
I have apologies from Mike Burrell, who is our manager at the Greater Norwich Local Plan, who would have been here this evening to present the report, but he was quite happy for me to report that due to his NHS app pinging him, he's had to isolate. So he does send his apologies this evening. So the report before you tonight does have 4 recommendations. I'll conclude on those shortly, but just as Sue has already mentioned, the Reg 19 stage, which is our last iteration of the local plan, took place between the 1st of February and the 22nd of March. This gave third parties the opportunity to make representations on the legal compliance and soundness of the plan. And that is really important because that is what we are now looking at. Have we got a legal and sound plan to submit to the Secretary of State for independent examination? All those representations have been assessed by the Greater Norwich Local Plan team and have been summarised in the number of appendices and papers before you, and also on the Greater Norwich Development Partnership website. There was a total of 1,316 comments received, 263 support, and 1,053 objections. All those have been given detailed observations, including those as detailed by Elsham Parish Council this evening. They have been taken into account as part of the process, and the team have reviewed these and looking at all the background papers in relation to those. It's set for the caveats within your recommendation, and those relate to recommendation 1, which we are looking to seek a statement of common ground with Natural England re the mitigation measures under the habitats regulations, and subject to the caveat to commit to proactively identify bringing forward sufficient gypsy and traveller sites to meet our identified need. We do conclude that we do feel that we have a sound plan to put forward to the Secretary of State for examination. Clearly, if those 2 caveats within your recommendations 1 and 2 cannot be achieved at any stage before we actually go to examination, then we obviously will have to come back to agree those. But we are satisfied we will have enough evidence and support to put that forward. Just to confirm that the Greater Norwich Development Partnership agreed the papers and also place shaping panel on the 28th of June, and ONS on the 29th of June also supported the papers. So obviously I'm here to answer any detailed questions for you as best as I can without having Mike here. So we'll just go to the recommendation on page 106 for you, Chair.
Thank you for that, Helen. We'll try and come up with some suitably difficult questions for you at the right time. Sue, is there anything you want to add?
No, Chair, I think that I probably covered that in my, covered most of the points in my question and my reply, but
Okay,
thank you.
so you're going to just put forward the recommendations
Should I do
for
them
us?
now? Okay. The recommendations, and on my page 108, if the board, apologies, it's not 108, I'm so sorry. Cabinet to recommend to council on page 106, 8.1. First point, agree that the Greater Norwich Local Plan, GNLP, is sound and to submit the plan to the Secretary of State for independent examination, subject to reaching an agreement in principle with Natural England in the form of a signed statement of common ground in relation to mitigation necessary to protect sites protected under the habitat regulations. Point 2, commit to proactively identify and bring forward sufficient gypsy and traveller sites to meet identified needs in accordance with the criteria-based policies of the current and emerging development plans. 3, to agree to request that the appointed independent inspector may make any main modification necessary to make the plan sound and legally compliant. And point 4, delegate authority to the Assistant Director for Planning in consultation with the portfolio holder for planning and in conjunction with Norwich City and South Norfolk councils to agree minor modifications to the Greater Norwich Local Plan prior to its submission, and B, negotiate any main modifications necessary to make the GNLP sound as part of the independent examination. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Sue. Do you have a seconder for that?
I'll second that.
Thank you, Jonathan. Any questions? And Helen's asked us to make them suitably difficult. No? Oh, we're going to let her get off lightly then. Okay. One from me on the habitat element. Just find it. So relates to paragraph 2.7. So there's an element there around the mitigation with Natural England on the habitat regulations. Is there any update you can give on that relating to how that will look? And then the other thing around the gypsy and travellers, we talked about bringing forward sites, just maybe a bit on the process element of that.
With respect to the habitats regulations, obviously that's a Norfolk-wide. We're looking to agree a statement with the Norfolk Strategic Framework. That is still work in progress. We're confident that that element will be signed off and agreed with Natural England before we need to submit the plan. With respect to recommendation 2, with respect to the gypsies and travellers, we need to work with all 3 parties, and that's, well, actually 4 parties with potentially the county, but looking at whether or not we can bring any land forward as part of identifying additional sites. We're looking at approximately 61 pitches to provide the need across the plan period, but there's a more urgent need within the first 5 years. So we're looking at that, but we will need to identify some sites before we go into the examination. So that recommendation 2 isn't dependent on submitting the plan. We will just need evidence to present to the examiner on soundness that we are working towards allocating some sites.
Thank you. Okay. Judy?
Thank you, Chair. Could I just ask a question about the gypsy and traveller sites? And I understand that there's 36 needed between 2017 and 2017 and 2022. Although it was expected that 21 of these would be met by residential pitches that were already planned to be built or brought back into use by 2022. Is that the case? Or have you
Yes.
got to look from scratch?
No, we're not having to look from scratch because Norwich have a significant site they are bringing forward as part of those 21, which is why we've referred to those as those being planned to be brought forward. So there are other sites that we may have given consent for as well that haven't actually been brought forward, but they've got planning permission. So yes, as far as I'm aware, those 21 are ones that we can actually see should be coming forward. But quite clearly, by the time of the examination, we will have to update the inspector on that.
Okay, thank you for that. Anything for anybody else? No? Okay, so we have the recommendations before us, which have been proposed and seconded. All those in favour? Okay, thank you, James. Okay, so that can now do what it needs to do as far as progressing to submission, subject to other councils approving, sorry, the other. Yes. So, sorry, it goes to council now, doesn't it? So it goes to council at the July council meeting. Okay, so that moves us on then to item 9, the capital budget. I think that probably is with you, Rodney, isn't it?
A big financial number. So very much within the current capital programme, you've set aside £3 million for the potential purchase of refuse vehicles and or the refurbishment of the existing depot. When you set this budget, it wasn't clear whether or not the council would be purchasing the refuse vehicles or whether the new refuse contractor would be purchasing the vehicles. However, during the initial stages of this procurement process, it's become clear that it's more cost effective for this council to procure the vehicles, and therefore we need to make sure we've got adequate provision within our capital budgets to allow for this purchase to take place when the contract is awarded. So this short report is very much asking you to recommend to full council that we increase the capital budget from £3 million to £5.7 million, which is the maximum amount we expect these refuse vehicles will cost. The actual cost will obviously be determined by the final tender we receive, but the outcome of that won't be known until later on in August. That's all I was going to add, Chair.
Thank you for that, Rodney. Trudy, anything you want to add?
Yes, thank you. Report at 2.4, this top-up would be to the upper end of what we're looking at, but also, as you can see in 3.2, if we don't do this, it could potentially defer us awarding the decision. So just because we've moved the money over to it doesn't mean we're going to spend it, but it is prudent to move it over. So I'm very happy to recommend to council that the 2021 capital budget for refuse services is increased from 3 million to 5.7. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Do we have a seconder for that? Thank you, Judy. Any questions at this point in time? No? Okay, so that's been proposed and seconded. All those in favour? Thank you, James. Okay, so that moves us on then to item 10, insurance contract.
Could I come in?
Yep, please do.
Thank you. Since this paper first came out, when we didn't have a suitable cabinet meeting to be able to go through due process, we now have put in another cabinet meeting on the 31st of August. So I would like to suggest we withdraw the paper from tonight and add it to cabinet and follow process in the normal way and not do the delegation that's requested. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll pull that item and it'll come back on the cabinet on the 31st of August. Okay, so that moves on to item 11, which is Broadland's use of the Norfolk Strategic Fund grant, starting at page 37. Is this you, Tig?
It is. Thank you, Chair.
Over to you.
Thank you. So if I may, just a very quick bit of context setting, the Norfolk Strategic Fund is a grant, is essentially the repurposed pooled business rates grant funding from that was rebadged essentially as Norfolk Strategic, as the Norfolk Strategic Fund in 2020, with the aim that the funds were to be used to assist in the economic recovery following the pandemic. Some preliminary discussions were had with Cabinet, with informal Cabinet in late 2020, and a draft program was put forward, which was accepted by Norfolk County Council as the administrators of the grant program. Subsequent discussions have led us to change some of the elements that were initially put forward in Table 1 in the report, and so we're now putting forward a revised program as per Table 2 in the report. The other bit of context that I'd like to just share with you is that the economic development team, in discussion with the portfolio holder here at Broadland and the portfolio holder in South Norfolk, are currently looking at what a comprehensive business support program will look like going forward, knowing that the needs of businesses are changing and have changed. And so we're looking at the mix of the sorts of business support activities that we will provide to support the local economy. And so as that's a work in progress at the moment, you will see in the proposal that there is an amount that's essentially unallocated to a specific activity. Rather, it's held there as essentially a contingency, and recommendation 2 of the report is asking for some delegated authority to the Assistant Director of Economic Development in consultation with the portfolio holder to make some decisions around how that amount will be allocated as we firm up the program of business support activity. But I'm happy to stop there, Chair, and respond to any questions.
Okay, thank you for that, Tig. Joe, did you want to add anything at this point?
I would like to change the figures in Table 2, if I may, and just to revise those. So the
Make sure the mic's on, Joe.
Awesome. Yes, it is on, I think. Sorry. Thank you. So I'd like to revise the figures in Table 2, if I may. So Startup SME Business Mentor, which is a 2-year contract, including on costs. I'd like to put that at 130,000, please. Marketing, comms and publicity for the grant scheme for 2 years, £10,000. I'd like to have SME startup business grants of a sum of 173,527. I'd like the Cambridge Norwich Tech Corridor contribution to go to 30,000, which will take in 2022 as well as this year. And I would like to reduce the contingency from 98,527 to 85,000. And going to the recommendations, so I would like to, the revised programme, as I've stated, is 8.1. And then I would like 8.2 to read, Cabinet agrees to delegate authority to the Assistant Director of Economic Growth in consultation with the portfolio holder for economic development to determine the use of the contingency amount of 85,000 and to decide on the governance arrangements for the SME startup business grants over the value of £5,000. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that, Joe. Okay, thank you, Trudy. So you're seconding that one. Are there any questions that anyone wants to ask at this point? Yeah, go, Joe.
Thank you. Tig, it was just a question about Table 1, which is sort of fairly irrelevant now, but I just wondered, on the original Table 1, where was the match funding coming from, please? Thank you.
Yeah, it's a bit of an historical artefact that was done up by officers that are no longer here, but as best I could determine, it was to come out of the Broadland Growth Fund, I think, if that's the name of the project. I have to be really confess to you, I'm not quite sure why we included an amount I can't recall why we included the amount of match funding. Of course, from my rereading of the terms and conditions, it wasn't required. So I'm not actually sure, I have to confess.
Okay, thank you for enlightening us where that came from. So anyway, as we've moved forward, that is not an issue now, because there's the numbers have changed a bit as was outlined, and it seems a good idea to put in the second year for the Cambridge Tech Corridor, which we play a crucial part in. So it's good to have that in there. So thank you for adding that one in. Were there any other questions for anybody? No? Okay. So that we have the recommendations, 8.1 as amended, and 8.2 as amended, as read out by the portfolio holder. And those have been seconded by Trudy. So all those in favour? That's unanimous, Jim. Thank you, James. Okay, so that moves us on then to item 12, moving towards first-class customer service. And this is at page 38.
Thank you, Chair.
I saw you over there and you've moved. So over to you, Sean.
Thank you, Chair. Customer satisfaction was identified as a corporate spark transformation priority project in January 2020, and our approach to complaints was one of the strands of our new ways of working program, just to put that into context. This report covers recommendations from both pieces of work. Many customers have a really positive experience with our services, and we already engage with customers directly in specific areas and for specific reasons. But there are, of course, always opportunities to improve and ensure that we continue to deliver the right service at the right time and in the right way. Although there are many things we do well at service level, our research identified that there's no overall ownership of customer experience, and that we hadn't set out a clear strategy for developing our customer service provision by using data and insight to inform decisions and meet the evolving needs and expectations of our customers. As we start to emerge from the global pandemic, where we and our customers have had to find new and different ways of doing things, there's never been a more important time, we think, for us to do this. This report represents a starting point and sets out the key building blocks which will enable us to transform and develop our customer service provision, and it includes a strategy which provides a basis for how we transform our services by ensuring that we consistently engage with customers regularly, listen to them and gather their feedback, and then use that to improve services. A charter that sets out what customers can expect from us to ensure that we're accountable, but also what we need from them, and this will help us protect our staff too. A new complaints policy that incorporates best practice recommended by the Ombudsman, which ensures that service areas are responsible for responding to complaints, ensures we engage with customers early and try to resolve complaints at the first opportunity, captures lessons learned in a structured way, and we can use those to help improve services, ensures that those customers that are not satisfied with our first response and choose to escalate the complaint have an independent review, and ensures that we've done everything we can before a case escalates to the Ombudsman. It also includes an unreasonably persistent complainants policy. Although not a major issue for the council, we do have customers where, even though they've had a full and complete response from us, we find it difficult to manage them. This sets out a clear policy for how we can do that in a way that's consistent and allows the appropriate decision making at the right levels. And then finally, a new customer experience and insight lead role, new role in the council, with overall responsibility for analysing and bringing together customer data, customer feedback, lessons learned right from across the organisation to ensure that we transform and improve the customer experience to meet their needs. Bringing this role in will enable us to start to develop a series of customer satisfaction standards and an overarching customer satisfaction measure, which councillors will know sits within the delivery plan currently. And we'll bring that piece of work back to members in due course once we have the role in place. We have been running a pilot customer satisfaction survey in the background on the old website, just limited to customers that visit the website. This is really just to kind of help us develop what we think that customer satisfaction survey should do and look like. We're currently analysing the feedback from that, and we'll report back to you on that in due course. And we hope to widen that out into customer forums, more bespoke surveys as we evolve the role. The recommendations that we're making on page 45 and 46, Chair, and I'm very happy to take any question.
Thank you for that, Sean. Jonathan, anything you want to add at this point in time?
Yeah, I'd like to thank Sean for putting all this together. It's a very comprehensive idea that we've got moving forward. I think the public have had more and more interest in the level of service offered by companies. Increased customer service is important to every business, and the council should be no different in feeling that that increased level of customer service that we offer is something that we should look for. We obviously have had procedures in place in the past where people have been able to complain if they needed to, but I think the word that we're using is business intelligence, where we make use of the information that we have to see where we've got issues and concerns. Overall, I don't think we'll see a lot of problems, but we'll be aware of what we do have, and I think customer service is something which we are looking to do, and this gives us a clear strategy and a clear charter for the customers to understand how we will act. So I think it's a very good piece of work. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that, Jonathan. And the recommendations, are you putting those forward for us?
I can put the recommendations on page 45 going into page 46. 8.1, the Cabinet consider and approve the adoption of the proposed customer strategy, the adoption and the proposed customer charter, and to note the appointment of the new customer experience and insight lead. This role will obviously be important to help collate all the new business intelligence data that we have and to actually inform us of what is happening with that information that we are receiving from the customers. The role has not been filled as of yet, but they are very keen to obviously promote that and get that sorted out as quickly as possible. So that is a new role that will be placed into our structure that we can then have that information go on to that person. 8.2 is the Cabinet approve and recommend to Council the adoption of the proposed complaints handling policy and the adoption of the proposed unreasonably persistent complaints policy, which again, I don't think are going to be overused, but it's good to have them there.
Okay, thank you for that. Do we have a seconder? Thank you, Sue.
I'll second that, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, so are there any questions anyone has? Fran?
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I just want to ask a couple of questions, really. As I went through this paper, there's one thing that concerned me is that currently that our complaints can be reviewed by the same person, which was incredible, really, to believe that was the case. However, I'm pleased to see that the new system will stop that happening, and actually any complaint that continues to, further will actually be reviewed by somebody else. But on page 61 and 62, you've got a time scale of 15 working days, but does that mean from when the complaint comes in to when it's fully resolved, or is that when it's reviewed, etc., etc.? It's not really very clear. But also as well, there are no contact details on this form for a complainant to actually use. There is nothing. There's nothing at the website, email, phone, or a postal address. And I cannot believe that a complaints policy would actually not have this on there. So I just wonder where it is and when it will be added. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that, Fran. Sean, Jonathan, John, can you pick that one up?
Yeah, on the first point, 15 days from the time the complaint's received in the organisation, with the exception where the officer contacts the complainant and actually agrees a different timescale. So there are sometimes opportunity or occasions where we need to go to other authorities to get a full response, but we would do that with agreement with the complainant. So it could be longer, but the normal turnaround time would be 15 days.
Would it be good to put that in the policy then?
Yep.
Just to be clear.
In terms of publishing, what we brought forward onto the new website, the existing policy and contacts that we had. Once this policy is, or if this policy is approved today, then we will, and then through Cabinet, then we'll take that forward and make sure that the new website reflects the appropriate contact details.
Okay, so picking up those 2 points, so we'll ensure the timescales noted in there properly, and also that the contact details, however they should be, I think was suggested, email,
Every possible
sort of way,
avenue, really,
will
that somebody might
flow there,
use.
whether it be in the document or on the website relating to it in some way, shape or form. Yeah. Okay. I had Trudy next, followed by Judy. So Trudy.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Mine's just around 6.1, and that this is the initial 2-year contract. I'm wondering how we're going to measure whether we need to extend this, because obviously if we're not really measuring things properly at the moment, how are we going to see if this role is then necessary going forward, or whether we've managed to embed it within the team, and once it's all set up and running properly, whether we would actually need to continue the role or not?
Can I just help with that one a little bit before going over to Sean? So currently, under the current system, we've got lots of people involved in complaints at all sorts of level in the authority. There is a huge hidden cost within the staffing cohort. So whilst this is a new post, actually we'll be taking out loads of time, self included, spent dealing with coordinating complaints when we shouldn't have officers at that level doing those functions. And in terms of the evaluation, perhaps Sean, you could pick that up.
Thank you. I think as we move through transformation of our services, a key part will be to play in customer data, customer insight, which this role will give us. That then will allow us to transform the services and be able to identify those savings that we make as a result of listening to what the customers have said to us. And that's a normal part of how we would do a service review. So at the end of that service review, we'll be able to say, well, this saving was as a result of the customer insight and customer feedback that we've had. And there's a measurable that we can put onto that. I think it's fair to say it's a new role. So we need to get someone in, and we need to get someone actually starting to pull this data together. So there won't be an immediate response, but we're confident that by the end of that 2-year period, we'll be able to make a link between the information that we've pulled in and how we've used that information in the organisation. It won't necessarily manifest itself in a financial saving. It could be in an efficiency. It could be in an improved service. I think there are a number of ways you would see it, but that would be the kind of measure I'd be looking for.
Okay, thank you for that. Judy?
Thank you. I also was going to raise the point of timescales within the complaints process. So I'm pleased that that's definitely there. I was just going to ask a question about the analysis. And does that mean that there's got to be a particular this particular software to be purchased to actually do this analysis? Because and I'm not also quite sure at what stage is a complaint as opposed to a request for a service, which perhaps they haven't done or received.
So in terms of do we need new software, do you mean for complaints management or for the business intelligence analysis?
You said that you were going to collect data to improve our service. I'm saying, how are you collecting that data? And does that mean that you're buying particular software to do that?
So we can and do have access to data now. It's pulling that into a central place and allowing us to see it. We can get that from our existing systems. Longer term, we have a separate piece of work called the Business Intelligence Project, which is running as part of the Spark transformation. That would look to transform the way we pull data directly from our systems into a central holding point, if you like, which would allow us to do that analysis. But that's a separate funding stream to this. And some money has been set aside for that. The second part of the question, sorry, could you please? That's talking, not writing down.
So, yes, my question was, and I was going to use bins as an example, but perhaps that's doing the waste providers a disservice. Do you differentiate between somebody saying, right, I haven't received a service, e.g. I haven't got my bin. Would you treat that as a complaint or just a request for service? And I just wondered who sort of sorts out these the difference between the two and make sure they go to the right place.
Thank you for clarifying that. Yeah, we differentiate between the two. So if it comes through one of our service request forms, it wouldn't become a complaint. If it was a missed bin form, for instance, to stick with that, we wouldn't deem that a complaint. That's just a normal service request. There is a grey area sometimes where something comes in that looks like a complaint or the customer thinks it's a complaint. We have a complaint assigner role built into the process, and that person would look at the query from the customer and say, actually, this is a service request, and they would hand that off to the service to resolve and contact the customer directly. So there would be a bit of analysis as to whether this is a complaint or whether this is a normal service request, which it kind of goes beyond how the customer badges it, because obviously if it's a service request, we don't want to be recording it as a complaint. The benefit of what we're proposing, however, is if even with those grey areas, we have an opportunity to record that onto our lessons learned or our complaints database. So if we're getting a lot of things that appear to be complaints, or the customer is deeming them complaints, but they're service requests, we would get some analysis on that, and we'd be able to say, actually, there's probably something we can do here up front to stop these being perceived as a complaint. So I hope that answers the question.
Okay, thank you for that. Any other questions?
Chair, can I just,
Sue?
thank you. In relation to who determines what the complaint is that going to be the officer that is there a structure for? It's just that you might not think it's a complaint, but to the resident, it is a complaint. So who will determine that their bin not being emptied for 2 or 3 weeks in a row or something? Who will determine that that's not a complaint? Will it be the officer that we're going to employ? Have you set out some policy somewhere that says?
So it won't be the officer that we're going to employ, because they're going to be operating at a slightly higher level than that. It would be down at the complaint assigner role or the complaint allocator role. So there's a couple of opportunities there. We've given all of the staff who are going to handle complaints some recent training on great complaint handling, and the steer we're giving people is, if in doubt, I think we should record it as a complaint. I think the benefit should be with the customer. We can deal with that very quickly. It doesn't necessarily need to be a laborious process from it. It might be a quick phone call to that customer to understand what it is. So I think we tried not to put something down too rigidly, because it tends to then become a is it, isn't it? I think we want people to use a little bit of intelligence and a little bit of common sense, and our steer through the training and the rollout of this policy, if approved, will be, if in doubt. It's a fairly quick process to put it on the complaints database. We can do some analysis on the back of that and see if it's a trend or an issue rather than a complaint.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just come back on that?
Please do.
It would just be, I would be really pleased if we could record whether it was a complaint or whether it wasn't a complaint, just so that we've got the figures to determine how our residents are reacting to the service that we've got. That's something I think is quite important, that it should always be noted. It should not be dismissed because it doesn't seem as though it's a complaint.
So I think if it comes through as a complaint, we'll record it, whether we take it through or not. I think where we wouldn't record it is if it's a service request, like the example was particularly, if it's a missed bin, there's a proper process for missed bins. We can do analysis on missed bins and missed bin requests already, so we wouldn't need to record it. Is that? But I think if it comes through our route as a complaint, so let's say, for instance, the customer fills in a complaint form, yes, we would record that, even if we record it as a handoff to a service to say it's a service request. Yeah, I think we're on the same page on that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. Any other questions? No? Okay. I think from my point of view, pleased to see the charter come forward, so thank you for that. It's always good when our customers and residents know what to expect from us and how we would then behave at different points in relation to that, so that's good to see in there. Like Fran, I was a bit surprised to hear that the same person could deal with a complaint and another complaint about the same complaint as such. So it's good to see that that's been rectified and moved forward. So thank you for doing that. I had a question about recommendation 8.1.3, which is to note the appointment of the new customer experience and insight lead role. Knowing that we agreed that at last cabinet, I'm not quite sure why we need to note it at this one. Is there a need to note it?
It's in there for completeness, Chairman, but probably it could be part of the conclusion going forward, because you're right, Cabinet here to agree, and you've agreed the post previously. Yep.
Yeah, okay, so it's there, but we probably didn't need it to be there. Fair enough. Okay, so we've got the recommendations before us on page 45 and on to 46, 8.11, 8.12, 8.13, and 8.121 and 8.22, which have been proposed and seconded. So all those in favour? Thank you, James. Okay, so that moves us on to, looking for his place, to the skills and training project. So that's item 13, starting at page 68. This is Lucy doing this one. Good evening, Lucy. So over to you.
Can you hear me okay? Yeah. Okay. So the report sets out a proposed skills and training offer, which really aims to increase the opportunities available to our local residents, particularly in light of the pandemic, which has obviously created a much more challenging job market. So the first stage of the process was to conduct some background research, and this led us to the identification of 4 key cohorts to support, which are detailed in the report. So these are school leavers, those leaving higher education, recently unemployed and underemployed, and also individuals wishing to set up their own business. So it's these groups that we think would most benefit from a skills and training intervention. In the report, we categorise actions in 3 ways. So there's an important advocacy function for the council to play, a signposting function, and the report also sets out some proposals for direct delivery. I'll just mention apprenticeships quickly as well. They are very much a priority for the councils. Our levy, apprenticeship levy, is currently underutilised. So one of the direct delivery proposals we're looking at is the development of a coordinated apprenticeship scheme. So this will enable us to provide opportunities for young people in the local area, but it'll also allow us to fill our own skills gaps in certain areas across the councils. So as part of this, one of the recommendations in the report and something we're looking for agreement on is the establishment of a centralised apprenticeship budget. So this will be made up of recurring underspend. It's not additional funding, and this will encourage teams across the councils to take on apprentices. That's all I was going to cover. I don't know if I've missed anything. No. Myself, Jamie, Tig, Micah here to answer any questions. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Lucy. Anything you want to add to this, Jonathan? Sorry, Joe.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, I'd just like to look at the recommendations and make a change to recommendation 8.1 on page 80. So I would like it to say, Cabinet notes the impacts on skills and training in South Norfolk and Broadland as a result of COVID-19. And then Cabinet agrees the intended approach to support direct delivery projects as outlined in 4.3.1 to 4.3.6, just to galvanise the direct delivery programmes that we want to deliver. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you for that. So you're proposing those 2 recommendations. Anyone seconding those? Thank you, Fran. Are there any questions in relation to what you've heard or is in the report before you? Yeah, Fran?
Thank you, Chairman. Thanks, Lucy, for putting this together. I think it's a really good piece of work. And I just wanted to ask about apprenticeships. How we're looking to use the apprenticeship levy within the one team. How much are we looking to use it to grow our own as such? So if, for instance, we've got shortage of planners, but we've got people who may have worked in the planning department or of aspiration to be there, are we looking to include them in the apprenticeship scheme? Thank you.
Okay, so who's going to jump in? Jamie?
It was any one of four. I step back slowest, I'm afraid. Excellent question, Councillor Wymark. So yes, in short, we're looking at making sure that both we maximise our levy, which we haven't utilised to its fullest effect, but also use it to maximum effect in terms of some of the harder to recruit areas and disciplines in our organisation. So we're currently working through areas such as planning, but also environmental health officers, where we know we're increasingly fishing from a receding pool of resource in Norfolk, it seems, as are many other district councils. So trying to make sure that we can, where we're finding it hard to recruit, we're effectively growing our own talent and seeing that talent through as a pipeline into the right sorts of roles in the future.
Chairman, could I just build on that point, because apprenticeships, of course, can be at entry level, undergraduate or postgraduate, and this is a really, really good opportunity to fulfil some of the promises that you made in the feasibility study about opportunities for people to grow their careers within the one team. So the question is a really good opportunity to bring that point out all the way up to and including a master's qualification.
Okay, thank you for that. Judy, then we've got Trudy.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to ask a couple of questions about young people. Who did you consult regarding the suggestions for the 16 and 19 age group? And also, when we're trying to fill the council vacancies, and what sort of links do you have with high schools, City College, and the UEA? Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that, Judy. While they're all looking at each other to see who's going to jump in. Yeah, no one fancies that one, do they? Okay, so Mike.
Oh, that was a bit loud. Sorry, Chairman. In terms of young people, we're working closely with DWP and our youth advisory boards as well. And we know, as you'll see in paper and previous work we've done, 16 to 19 and 18 to 24-year-olds are particularly hard affected by COVID. And we know that they traditionally come into entry-level jobs and also those kind of first graduate type jobs. So they've been hit particularly hard. So we know that not just in Broadland, but nationally, we know that's a big cohort of issues. But also we know that young people, if they don't get a job when they leave education, whether that's 16, 18, 21, and they don't establish themselves in the workplace, they know their life chances are so much more reduced as they move forward, because they don't get that confidence boost. They don't get that first opportunity to make money. And on average, they end up over £10,000 a year poorer in their 40s and 50s. And sorry, Councillor Legger, what was the second part of the question?
It's to do with the links to City College, UEA, and schools.
That'll teach me not to bring a pen. And the second part is we're actually working. We work reasonably well with colleges and schools already, but that's something as part of our plan. And as we move forward as Skills and Training Board, about how we increase those links with schools and colleges, because what we want to do is to get in early, create a careers support offer that genuinely looks at local government as a realistic option. And I know we're all passionate here about working in local government, but not everyone is. So can we sell those careers, particularly those hard to reach careers, and also as we're looking through a number of programs about offering work placements, offering support, offering advice, so that actually young people can then, we can identify young people early who want a career in government, and then we can work with them. And the UEA we've done, and Lucy's done some work already to work with the UEA. So that's an area which we want to explore further. We know that the UEA tends to retain a lot of graduates into the Norfolk area. So if we've got people who have come up, they've chosen to come to Norfolk, and we know Norwich is a fine city, and people tend to stay around this area. So can we tap into that? So that's something that we will also be looking at. So this is embryonic, but that's something, certainly areas we do want to work with.
No, thank you for that, Mike. As you've alluded to there, there's the thing with the UEA is that when people discover Norfolk and Norwich, they tend to love it and then want to stay in the area, which is something we should hook into. Trevor, you wanted to add to this?
Chairman, yeah, if I can, because we kicked off a piece of work under Jamie and the Skills Board, but it's a really exciting scene. And colleagues in other local authorities and us are working together to say, actually, if we're all looking for EHOs, how do we build a cohort big enough for the training provider to come to us rather than us send people to the training provider? And also that will enable us over time to build a catalogue of opportunities and careers that we can directly take to our sixth forms to inspire and encourage the young people in our schools. So and that's not a selfless act, because we will have a skills shortage if we don't engage better with the young people in our schools. So it's a win-win, and really encouraged by this report coming forward and the work that's gone into this under the Skills Board.
Thank you for that, Trevor. Yeah, I'd just like to reiterate that in the basis, there's a very exciting area, and it also is so important to us because it is about the future, about where we find our talent, where we find our stars, where we find those that are going to set the world on fire almost. And it's developing that as it moves forward. I'd also like to just commend you for the section in 4.9.6 and the ingenious way of raising the funding. I think that's a particularly well done. It obviously puts pressure on all of the business teams and business departments to actually facilitate that, to make that work. But also it's about recycling the resource we've already got and actually using it rather than it just sitting there as a vacancy that's not used in some way, shape or form. So I thought that was particularly ingenious and well done on that one. So more bright ideas like that, always welcome. Just moving to the recommendations, I know the portfolio holder has changed recommendation 8.1, but I'm still a bit, well, not going to use the phrase, but again, we see that the phrase "to note" is appearing in our recommendations, and we have tried to discourage that, and I would again like to discourage that. So can I suggest we actually further amend recommendation 8.1 if the portfolio is happy with that, to actually strike out the first part of the sentence. So the element from "to note" the impact on skills training and the wider economy in the South, Norfolk and Broadland, and "to note." So we remove all of that and just start with "agree the intended approach," and so on from there, if the portfolio holder is happy with that.
Yes, Chair, very happy with that. Thank you.
I just better check with the monitoring officer that I haven't overstepped my...
Absolutely fine, Chairman.
No, thank you. So are you happy with that? Joe, Fran as the seconder? Yep. Okay, so... Oh, sorry. Yep, back to you, Trudy. Did have you on my list, but...
That's okay. And it takes me to the point you've just raised. Recommendation 8.2. I'm thoroughly supportive of all the proposals in the report. I did have a meeting with Jamie and Mike regarding the funding, and they said they had spoken to Rodney, and Rodney was on holiday, so I couldn't speak to Rodney. So I'd just like confirmation that these underspends you believe are achievable, really.
Drum roll, Harry suggests. No,
See, it was that long pause there. It was like, oh, is he going to go a different way?
I can confirm I have been working with Mike, Jamie and the team on this, and historically we've had underspends on the pay budgets of 4 or 5% easily, sort of thing. So actually I'm comfortable with this recommendation.
Okay, so thank you for confirming that one, Rodney. Any other questions or comments, Fran?
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, it was just about Carrowbreck. I just wondered, obviously we're looking to start training there again soon. And I just wondered what programs we had up and coming and the uptake, really. Thank you.
Okay, I think that one's with you, Tig.
It is. Thanks, Chair. Thanks for the question, Councillor Waymark. So just at the moment, Carrowbreck is still not being heavily utilised. We have started running some courses at Carrowbreck, some first aid courses. and fire safety, that sort of thing. We are reviewing Carrow-Breck at the moment, sort of in its totality. We've had a couple of approaches in recent months from other organisations also involved in training, looking at how they might also be able to perhaps co-use that space with us. So what I'm proposing to do is to bring a formal report back to Cabinet in the next few months, which actually sets out a range of options based on those proposals and our own use of Carrow-Breck. So we are in the process of developing the draft of that report at the moment.
Okay, thank you for that, Tig. It's good to hear that it's starting to come back into life after the pandemic. So it's good to hear that we're starting to get Carrow-Breck up and running again as a training facility. Any other questions, comments? No? Okay, so we have the recommendations as amended before us. Are you okay with those? Yep, okay. So proposed by Joe and seconded by Fran. All those in favour? Thank you, James. Okay, so that moves us on then to item 14, page 94, the emergency planning structures. And I think that's over to you, isn't it, Nick?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. So if I can introduce this for a couple of minutes. Firstly, Broadland District Council is an emergency planning authority, and we're a Category 1 responder under the Civil Contingencies Act 2004. That puts us in the same category as the blue light services and the major infrastructure providers. Our local communities are exposed to a range of potential emergency incidents, and thankfully they don't happen every day or every week, but when they do, they can have serious impacts. We operate an emergency plan, and that sets out pre-planned mechanisms and structures so that we can respond effectively and we can prevent as far as possible or minimise the impacts for our communities. And in working hours, our services can respond and deploy very effectively. The issue comes out of hours. And very often, emergency incidents by their nature seem to happen out of hours rather than in hours. Now, the report before you proposes a decision to establish a 24/7/365 emergency incident officer scheme offering a guaranteed response to incidents. And the question might well be, but what precisely will be the value and the additional contribution made? And I hope to cover that in this brief introduction. I've summarised in section 1 of the report before you what the intention is for the service to provide. And it's perhaps important to say that the guaranteed response out of hours, the speed of response, the level of working with other agencies, and the unique contribution we can make in the quality of support for local residents are key ingredients. But the major categories of incidents I'm describing here are severe weather, flooding, serious pollution, transportation, or serious fire. At least 3 of those we've seen in the last 12 months across the collaboration between the 2 districts, but we've also seen them in our own Broadland district. So the proposal here would enable us to assess wider impacts and start to tackle them before they spread any further. For example, in December, when we saw a major weather system stall over South Norfolk, and that could just as equally have been in the Broadland district, we saw some severe flooding in a number of locations. Businesses were closed and a number of residents had yet to return to their homes. There was no opportunity to provide an out-of-hours manned response to that particular incident, and the duties instead fell on a number of council officers, which was sustained for a period of 1.5 to 2 days, and those were heavy and extensive. We identified that eyes on the scene would really help us in a number of ways, and I've identified at 4.3 of the report what this proposed action might do for us. So firstly, to provide an eyes-on assessment of local needs, which could help us to identify how best we can tailor our support to the incident for local people who sometimes don't want to be carted many miles away to an overnight rest centre, for example. To assist the local community in problem solving and early work starting to link with services out of hours to whilst we are still on the scene. So there's a number of things that we are capable of doing there. Our particular contribution includes our unique local knowledge, the links and networks we have with local communities and through elected members, and then the contribution of hazard assessment and problem solving that we are uniquely placed to make. Now, this proposal is based on a model that's been tried and tested elsewhere. I have to say that the feedback was very strong indeed to that. The cost to Broadland of this proposal is 45% of the £15,000 total. And the proposal before you, the funding constitutes a standby scheme where we have a guaranteed response out of hours. It would include the call handling and the fielding, no matter how long that might be, the response and scrambling to the scene, and all the work on the scene. In addition to that, it includes the small quantity of equipment, clothing, etc., that wouldn't be needed to assist the officer on the scene. So that's, I hope, I should probably draw a halt there, or I'll read the entire report out, and I've got no intention to do that for you. But I hope that summarises the proposal that's before you. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Nick. Yeah, it's useful to see this laid out in that way. The question, I think, coming back at you is this value add element of how do we see that actually happening? And I don't know if you can elaborate on that any more for us. But it's that our concern, and as you know, when we talked about this before, was having someone on site or on location that was basically getting in the way rather than helping the situation. And it's understanding how that would work. I think we're in a better place of understanding how someone could coordinate, but not necessarily on site, which is probably the key element. So I don't know if there's anything on that you could add for us.
Yes, absolutely, Chairman. So first thing to say is that if we coordinate and provide a response, and that's a telephone-based response, there are some strong limitations to what we're able to see on the ground and what we're able to do on the ground. In my experience in emergency planning, it's more common when we have a response officer that when they arrive on the scene, the blue light services say, "I'm really glad you're here. We've got a few questions that you can help us with, and let's together formulate our understanding of what the problem is here." It's very unusual for that not to change the response due to the local authority expertise being put into an incident. And that might sound surprising, but the blue light services aren't any more designed to guarantee to solve an emergency out of hours incident than the local authority services are. So actually, the unique quality of what local authorities provide tends to be very well received and to make a tangible difference to the emergency services. What it'll often do is take a slightly wider scope for identifying what are the potential consequences, primary, secondary consequences of an emergency incident, and starting to anticipate those before they roll out any wider. So we have shall I say, a breadth of view that is wider than the emergency services, and a link back to we will be responsible for the recovery after an incident, so we start to get that recovery in early on. Sometimes that reduces the consequences to the local community. Other times it means that we start to solve the problem and get people back into their homes more quickly. I don't know if that sounds too vague and too nebulous, but the experience of putting an emergency incident officer onto the scene has never, in my experience, been badly received, and has always made a positive difference to the blue light services and the other agencies involved. To the local community, it often means that we can find a much more comfortable and convenient local solution, temporary, before they can, for example, be relocated back into their homes. It can reduce the potential for displacing people for a sustained period of time. And I've yet to see a local authority officer on the corner wondering what can I do during the emergency incident. It's much more likely that they start to anticipate, for example, in a flooding incident, that mapping the extent, starting to identify what will housing and economic development, environmental health services need to do once they can get in and talk to local businesses. So we start to roll up the support for the consequences of the incident, even while we're dealing with the incident. I hope that's helpful.
Okay, thank you for that. So from our regulatory requirement, are we fulfilling that today? And is this in addition to the regulatory requirement?
Under the Civil Contingencies Act, we are a Category 1 responder, but we are not duty bound to offer an out-of-hours response to emergencies. So this sits outside of the regulatory framework. This is about the civil defence and the public good and how local authorities can respond to the emergency scenario, but it is not a statutory requirement to provide the out-of-hours response.
Okay, so I heard that we currently do what we're required to do, but there is more we could do if we wanted to do it.
Yes, that is absolutely right. What the report tries to do is to lay out the advantages of being in close support of local communities, regardless of when a serious incident happens, and the balance against the low cost of establishing the scheme, such as that is. But you're perfectly right. We are not duty bound to do this. We identify a high value in doing it. And when we look back at the consequences of a major incident in December, we find that the costs and the effort fell disproportionately on parts of the local authority that were not resourced to do that. So we tend to get drawn in anyway. But the proposal here provides us a guaranteed service that makes that much more efficient and reliable for local residents.
Okay, and the other aspect you talked about there was the local knowledge and understanding that would bring to a situation. Again, the proposal talks about 8 people who would be in that place on call on a rota basis. And there may be instances where people don't know the local area, that when they're on call, where there is an incident, and that, again, how would we get over that? Because it sounds, again, using the example you talked about, the flooding aspect, it sounded like there was a lot of expectation on one person potentially in this situation, if this was applied to that and was available at that point in time to deliver, and I'm not quite sure how that expectation would be fulfilled.
So 3 key ways that will be fulfilled. The first is that we provide specific training into our responding emergency incident officers, so they're very clear on emergency planning structures, their engagement with the other services, and their specific role in the incident. The second is to provide them with some tactical and practical training so that they can add value in terms of what they are doing on site during the incident. And the third one would be to give them, if they don't already have it, that rounded set of connections into other services so that they are closely familiar with what can the council services offer, and they have a good set of links so that they can reach back into the local authority and get the expertise they need, regardless of which service they're drawn from. In practice, it's been stronger than it might sound, and it's worked very well.
Okay, thank you for that. Trevor, you wanted to come in?
Chairman, thank you. Nick picked up the points I was going to raise. Really, what we're saying is if the cabinet were to agree this proposal, we would be able to provide in a more robust and effective fashion both our statutory obligation and potentially add more value to the service that we're able to provide to our residents in an equitable way, rather than currently relying on 2 individuals to provide that service who are fantastic at what they do. But we really, I believe, should be providing a more robust, effective and reliable service in the event that it's called upon. Like any risk management, it's an insurance policy. And so I guess the real question for Cabinet is, do you want to buy the insurance policy or not? I think as a Category 1 responder with statutory responsibilities, this is an insurance policy I would certainly recommend to you as Cabinet.
Okay, thank you for that, Trevor. Any other questions, Sue?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for this report. Can I just ask, in relation to 4.5 on page 98, a senior officer would always be on call on a rota system to provide the senior decision making in support of the emergency incident officer. Do we currently have a senior officer on call? I'm sorry, I'm sitting back to you again. Do we currently have someone on call at the moment, and would these emergency incident officers be answerable to that senior officer?
At present, we have an arrangement during COVID, which has been brought in specifically before COVID, where every CMLT member will provide on a rota some support. So if there's a senior decision-making required or a senior call in relation to COVID, then we would provide that. There is no cost to that, and there will be no cost going forward. The intention then is to make that structure available in support of an emergency incident officer out of hours. So above a certain threshold, if there is a cost that they need to incur or a decision they need to make that's got a certain significance, they will have the backup of a member of CMLT who is available by phone to provide that support to them. So there's no cost. It's just an additional part of support for this proposal.
Okay, Judy?
Thank you, Chair. I'm just sort of struggling with this a bit, and I'd rather like sort of a practical example. And so you've already mentioned the Long Stratton flooding. So there was someone called out, was there, from the senior team? And what did they do? And what wasn't done? And what would you have expected to be done if these rota was in place?
Thank you. Thank you very much for that question. So there was a sustained period of activity after the flooding incidents in South Norfolk from the 23rd to the 26th of December last year. There was no response to the scene. There was no resource to respond to the scene. Instead, there was a telephone conferencing that ran through the night and through the following day. That didn't provide an effective substitute for eyes on the scene. And there were circumstances that came to light during the incident that an officer on the scene, tasked from a local authority perspective, would have become aware of substantially earlier. So, for example, there was fast flowing water that was running in front of the appointed rest centre in Long Stratton, which would have meant that it wasn't accessible. That information wasn't available to us until a long time later in the incident, and that could have had a bearing if we had found it necessary to evacuate residents. In Long Stratton, there was an alternative location that, while not a formal rest centre, would have been a very good base for the small number of people who were displaced by the incident. And just finally, there were a number of residents and elected members in South Norfolk who were doing their level best with the sleeves rolled up to help residents who were personally impacted by the incident. And that was happening at the same time that the blue light services were still coming to terms with where's all the water coming from? What do we do? How do we manage it? And there is an opportunity there for the local authority working with residents and elected members to provide a rounded form of problem solving that can happen alongside the emergency services. So there really is a unique contribution that we can play. Just to go back to the start, we don't resource response to the scene of an incident in our authority as it currently stands. And so that would be a categorical and very clear distinction in what the service would offer if we do adopt this proposal.
Yeah, please do, Judy.
With your example, I'm just surprised with the rest centre point that the local police and fire weren't also aware of that and what alternative sites were available.
In that particular incident, which is in some ways unusual, in other ways it's not unusual, the focus of attention was on where the flooding was happening rather than the place of resort we would take people to that was somewhere further. Because of the severity of the severe weather and the flooding, no one was travelling anywhere. And so the blue light services were focused on the immediate environment of the incident rather than the location where we would be looking to transit people to. So that's not entirely unusual. And so in Long Stratton, the water was collecting in the centre of the town and it was exiting down one particular road at a depth and at a speed that hadn't been identified by blue light services. It would have been natural within the training of the emergency incident officer to take that wider look at what will happen next and what do we need to know before deciding where a local rest centre might be called. So at some point, clearly, the blue light services would travel first to get to the scene, and that would have uncovered it. But this is just one of those examples of where something could happen so much quicker with the sort of service that we are able to provide.
Okay, thank you for that, Nick. Any other questions, right, Fran?
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, Nick, you talked about people being displaced, and obviously that's a major issue with any serious incident, really. I mean, having someone on the ground, I mean, you can talk about Long Stratton, but other incidents too, would that have actually saved us money in the short and long term? Thank you.
It's not uncommon during an incident, if people are displaced, that they have to take a view, am I evacuating myself, which is quite common, but doesn't always happen. Sometimes the offer to accommodate people happens before they've realised that how serious it is. And so they accept the offer before thinking, if this is going to last for 12 or 24 hours, I'd rather go to friends and family, thanks very much, than take the offer up of temporary accommodation. So in the incident in December, accommodation was provided, but there were numbers of families who looked for alternative temporary accommodation. In fact, in Long Stratton, potentially there was a location that we could have temporarily taken people to where they're safe, warm, and they've got power when they didn't have that at home. That just gives them that alleviation, just so that we might say that they're people who who have not yet been flooded out, but they're on the verge of being flooded out. And if there's somewhere close enough locally where they can have resort, which is at no cost to the authority, then there is no housing cost, there's no rest centre opening cost, but we can then restore them to their properties without any delay as soon as the situation changes. So that's the speed and the quality that we're able to offer when we're local on site to an incident.
Okay, thank you for that, Frank. Sue?
Sorry, just another thought. If we were in a situation where there's a few incidents throughout both South Norfolk and Broadland, and there's only one member of the team working in the evening, there's 8 members in the team completely. So would we be able to call on those, or would it just literally be just the one? There's one coordinator. Supposing there was an incident in Broadland and one incident in South Norfolk at 2 extremes, would we then call on the other members of the team? Thank you.
That's a great question. I'm pleased to say that in my experience in running a model of this nature in the past elsewhere, that you pay for a scheme and you have 8 people, potentially with 2 reserves, all of whom are highly motivated to provide support during an incident, all of whom have the training. And if you need more than one, then normally on a scheme, you have a proviso that if we need more than one, will you be willing to respond? You might not be on call, but generally between 8 plus 2 reserves, you can, and the reserves aren't funded, you have plenty of resilience. So we would expect to be able to put more than one on a scene of an incident such as severe, where you might have a number of locations that are affected. So that's an added value in having a scheme of that nature, where you're not relying on a single person, but you've got a scheme and a number of trained people.
Okay, thank you for that, Nick. I've just realised I didn't do the recommendation, so I should do that at this point in time, having skip through that. So the recommendation is on page 99 at 8.1, which is Cabinet to agree the establishment of a 24/7, 365 emergency incident officer scheme, offering a guaranteed response to defined serious emergency incidents at an additional annual revenue cost of £13,000 and £2,000 for equipment, which is a total of £15,000 that Nick mentioned, which would be split as a cost 45% for Broadland and 55% for South Norfolk. So sorry, I meant to do that earlier and I forgot. So can someone second that? So thank you, Sue. Okay, so are there any other questions at this point in time around this? Thank you for bringing this forward, Nick. I think you're seeing where we're struggling with this. For me personally, I'm not sure putting 14 pence on everybody's council tax is going to pay back on this, but we'll see where we get to. Okay, so we have a recommendation and a seconder for that recommendation. If there are no other questions, we'll go to the vote. So all those in favour of this?
2, 3, 4, 5.
Okay, so that's carried. Good, so that moves us on then to not item 15. Sorry?
Did I miss that?
Moves on to item 15, which is the pension discretionary policy at page 160, which I think you're doing, aren't you, Emma? Yes, over to you, Emma.
Yeah, I am Chairman, that's me. So this is in front of you. This is something that we should review quite regularly, and we haven't done for a while. So this is bringing us up to date with, as it says, the discretionary element of the pension scheme and how we will apply that as a council. As part of pulling the policy together, we've taken on board the cost of that to make sure it's affordable and we are using public funds in the best way, and making sure that there's equality across the board, and that there is no discrimination. So this has been discussed with our staff consultation forum, which includes Unison reps and staff representatives, and they are in support of the proposal in front of you. The part that's probably worth the meat of it is on page 164. That sets out for you each employer at discretion, the description, and how we will propose to apply that at the council. And I will leave that there, Chairman, for any questions.
Thank you for that. Jonathan, anything you want to add?
I think obviously we have to understand this is a legal requirement to have this policy, so we have to have the policy, but the council does have limited resources and needs to maintain a balanced budget. So it's important to consider any discretionary matters in a policy to have that as clear as possible. So yeah, this is to approve the council's pension discretion policy. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Do we have a seconder for that? Trudy, thank you. Are there any questions that anyone has in relation to? No? Okay, so we can go straight to the vote then. All those in favour? Thank you. Okay, so that moves us on then to item 17, which is the exclusion of press and public. So I move that press and public be excluded from the meeting for the remainder items of business, because otherwise information which is exempt information by virtue of paragraph 3 of part 1 of schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972 as amended by the Local Government Access to Information Variation Order 2006 would be disclosed to them. Okay, so